Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is November 5, 2021. And to me, it looks like a great day to have a conversation about incels. What is an incel? An incel, well, the word itself comes from two words, involuntarily celibate. It's somebody who has a problem with relationships. And a few years ago, this was still an innocuous term. There were what they called love shy forums where people could go and discuss their emotional hangups and reasons why they had a hard time getting into relationships and, fear of intimacy and things like that. And then, a few years ago, it got weaponized. It got infiltrated. That community got infiltrated by the far right, who started to turn it into this hotbed of like terrorist level anti-feminism, misogyny, just women hating, and starting to turn it into like a terrorist cult. Inceldom, contrary to some people's opinions, in fact, a lot of incels, it's not an attractiveness problem. It's not a problem with men's appearances. It's a personality and attitude problem. You tend to see a lot of narcissism among these people, and you could say also elements reminiscent of the kind of conservative victimhood that, well, conservatives just love to screech about. And like many other arms of the far right that have been reaching out, trying to radicalize young men in particular, it is targeting young men in their late teens and 20s especially. This is a big problem. And, in my case, I am a guy with, under 5,000 subscribers currently on a Marxist YouTube channel. I think it's great that we've grown this much and we're trying to do broad-based left-wing education so that we can build something to counter the right, because the democratic liberal establishment seems to be more in bed with fascism than anything else. They're not going to push back. We've seen that time and time again. They're also not going to change the structural conditions. Believe me, I would love it if they would. But no, we have some really concerning material conditions which leave people ripe for radicalization. And we do have to combat that in every way that is actually at our disposal. And I can't go out there right now and change wages or make college free and, get these people into more productive types of situations in their life where they may not feel the call of doing something radically destructive, blaming women for their problems, or blaming transgender people for their problems, or really any kind of that gender-oriented scapegoating, anti-feminism, as I mentioned. Conservatism, which has always included these elements, anti-feminism, anti-LGBTQ+, etc. This is holding us back. This is not the solution. And there are people out there, just did a video on one last night, who are trying to say that they are left-wing and that actually, traditional American values and cultural conservatism, this is the real communism. This is the real anti-capitalism. It's easily disproved as false. I mean, just at every turn. Here are a few examples I'll put on the screen. So, first example, a Twitter user named C asks, as a man, why are you so concerned about how masculine other men are? And I would add in parentheses, according to your criteria, or like traditional conservative measures of that, which people have been fighting against since forever because they're oppressive and they take a huge amount of work to try to conform to them, and they're not natural. And the response is, quote, because if soy males, right-wing term right there, reflecting all kinds of pseudoscience and just garbage nonsense, because if soy males didn't exist, I would have zero issues. So right there, you have this statement which is literally scapegoating every problem this guy has on soy males. That seems like a really potentially dramatically harmful concept, actually. Because by that logic, if you could just rid the world of soy males, presumably by any means necessary, you would have zero issues. I think you have a lot of issues. I don't think that they really have to do with the independent existence of other men. I think they're in your head, actually. I think this is your demon you need to deal with. Anyway, because if soy males didn't exist, I would have zero issues. They are my number one enemies. Huh. So this is a communist saying the number one enemies are not the 1%, not international capital, not imperialism. It's men that he thinks are too effeminate. Why? Are they too distracting to you? Like, what is the issue? They are my number one enemies and the cause of all evil in the world. That's a pretty extreme statement. I mean, really extreme. Again, presumably, if you could just get rid, by hook or by crook, it's not mentioned, of, quote, what this guy considers soy males, there'd be no more evil in the world. Evil. Not just injustice. Evil. The soy male is the number one obstacle to communism. Okay, you're nuts. In my opinion, that is fucking deranged. That is my opinion. So it goes on, though. A couple of other examples. This is coming out of a conversation about how butch and masculine the men in East Germany were. You know, fine example of conservative communists who were real men. Well, actually, LGBTQ rights in East Germany were among the more advanced. You know, official persecution of LGBTQ plus people is a thing throughout most of the world in the 20th century. It continued to be a problem. However, in the second half of the 20th century, there were some gains made, with some countries not catching up until the 21st century. Of course, the United States is no exception. But in the case of East Germany, in the 1950s, it started being more lax, even though homosexuality was still illegal. However, it was legalized in 1968. Obviously, that's way too late, and this never should have been done in the first place. But nevertheless, we have a record of what was East Germany. And here's a nice meme. Quote, East German Supreme Court. Homosexuality, just like heterosexuality, represents a variant of sexual behavior. Homosexual people do therefore not stand outside socialist society, and the civil rights are warranted to them exactly as to all other citizens. Now, there's another huge layer of irony here in that the Giga Chad model, pictured here, who is a bodybuilder, he's very cut and chiseled, he's become popular as the subject of a number of memes, which are widespread in this particular community. I'm sure not because the guy is, attractive or whatever. Just, this is what they aspire to. Anyway, so after many rants from this particular person about, how, in East Germany, they were real men and they would never use pronouns in their bio. It's, oops. Literally, the Giga Chad guy uses pronouns in bio. Just pack it up already. This is trash. It's reactionary. And you're not being honest with yourself, and you're not being honest with your followers by continuing to promote this. It's your demons you're wrestling with here, in my opinion. And I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. In fact, most people recognize that this kind of acting out is projection. And it's disruptive. Now, if you are conservative and you hate Marxists and you're trying to disrupt the community, okay, I'll give you 3 points. You managed to achieve something like that for a limited amount of time. Savor the flavor, because in my opinion, it's already well on the way down. Now, let's get into this article about incels. The purpose here, again, is so that everybody understands this phenomenon a little bit better in its socio-political dimension, so that you know what you're looking at, and hopefully you'll be less susceptible to this or to letting it spread when you see it. You got to stand up, because, the incel community itself originally was, quote, love-shy people. It got taken over. And this will keep happening in whatever spaces people allow it to spread in. You just simply can't allow it to spread. So this is a paper coming from the Center for Right-Wing Studies at Berkeley, and it's not a strictly Marxist source, but, that's where the channel comes in. We do Marxism here, and applying it to the kind of social data that you can get from a research center like this, which to me is really invaluable. I recommend you go follow them immediately. Anyway, we can take it that next step and do some of that analysis and continue. But let's get into the article. So this paper is called Misogynist Incels and Male Supremacism, Overview and Recommendations for Addressing the Threat of Male Supremacist Violence. It's from February 2021, and it was written by Megan Kelly, Alex DeBranco, and Dr. Julia R. DeCook. I'll put a link to the original as usual in the description. Let's begin with the executive summary. Mass violence connected to incel ideology has increased public and academic scrutiny of incel communities online, although not all such communities support violence, and not all those who identify as incel will go on to commit violence. Incel communities have drawn the public, academic, and policy world's attention. The Institute for Research on Male Supremacism recommends the term misogynist incel, which can be understood linguistically as similar to the construction of the term racist skinhead, to distinguish the male supremacist ideology and movement from personal identification with the term incel. A failure to distinguish people who identify as incels or involuntarily celibate, including women, from misogynist incels leads to flawed recommendations and significant misunderstandings of the nature of the community, the prevalence of misogyny in our societies, and violence against women. Quick comment there, that is correct. I mean, a lot of people in the left online world already understand that distinction, and you wouldn't be singling out incels who are not, who are more of the innocuous, non-misogynistic type. And in fact, I talked to a commenter on the last video that I posted who said, hey, why are you singling out virgins, people who haven't had sex? And I said, no, incel means a lot more than virgin. And they said, oh, okay, I didn't know that. I said, yeah, it got weaponized a few years ago. So yeah, there is some value in making that distinction so that people who aren't as up to date with that, don't get confused about what we mean. So in this brief, we overview the formation and history of the incel community, focusing on the ideology of misogynist incels and its basis in dehumanization of women and male entitlement as it connects to the glorification and perpetration of violence. Misogyny is not unique to incels. Male supremacism can be understood as operating on a spectrum, and misogynist incels cannot be separated from broader societal patterns of misogyny. Misogynist incel beliefs develop from a male supremacist culture that consistently fails to mitigate violence against women and girls and teaches men that they are entitled to women for sexual and romantic fulfillment, and that women are only valued for their instrumentality to these ends. Although misogynist incels use more extreme dehumanizing language and glorification of violence, their belief systems and ideologies are developed from and supported by the cultural and societal contexts in which they live. So another comment on that, and a comment which again grew out of discussion with commenters. I would say that toxic masculinity, which is, this certainly falls under the helm of toxic masculinity. I would say that it is both a cause of and an effect of having no connection with women, alienation from women, and ignorance of female anatomy, as was featured in the last video, is just one facet of that. Now, we know that capitalism does alienate men from women. We also know that there have been significant efforts at pushing back on that alienation for more sexual and gender unity in terms of class solidarity and just general kindness and understanding of the human experience. Men need to understand that femininity is not just a masculinity deficit. It's a qualitatively different, yet equally vital human experience. And when people go out there and they do this gender cop, gatekeeping masculinity thing, making communism out to, be like MAGA values from the 1950s about, what is traditional gender roles and things like that, you're cutting yourself off from, much of human experience. I can't even quantify it, but that's an alienation that we're actually trying to fight on the left. It's one of the things I took for granted when I said in the last video that I was blindsided by some of this entering the Marxist YouTube world and trying to do the audiobooks and things like that. I thought that everyone had this sort of baseline ground level education. If we have to have these conversations, that's fine. I'm happy to facilitate in that. I was just really shocked at, the sort of lack of this understanding that was out there. I think that some of that may be sincere. And I think that there is also a phenomenon that we're in a weird phase right now in the protracted civil conflict in the US, where conservatives are finding that being a conservative has become so stigmatized, so socially unacceptable, and that whole world has narrowed so much that in order to not feel like their options are limited for social engagement, they have to start pretending to be something else. But their characteristic core ignorance, which drives conservative traditional beliefs, is often still there. So they can't pull it off. They can't pull off LARPing as Marxists or whatever. And this channel is called Socialism for All. The for all is sincere. You do not have to show your leftist membership card to show up here. But that said, if you know that you have more of a conservative upbringing, as many of us have had, and that you may not be up to the basics even, then have some humility and don't start, hammering others with your conservative views. I know that many people had conservative values spread to them through threats and intimidation. That's a lot of how traditional values get propagated. And if you had that kind of dynamic growing up in one way or another, I'm sorry. And you honestly have my sympathy. But you can't keep perpetrating that on other people. You need to stop. And if you don't stop, especially when people repeatedly tell you to stop and tell you this isn't it and you're doing it wrong and back up and all this other stuff, and you keep pushing, that's when people start wanting to exclude you because you're not actually trying to make nice with the community. You're not trying to learn. You're not trying to change your values. You're not trying to actually become something else. You want your cake and eat it too. You want to be a conservative, but say that you're for the most progressive social force in history. That's just not a thing you can do. So, when people start assuming, for example, that you're a cop or an infiltrator, it's because you're acting like one. And if that isn't you, take a back seat, bring yourself up to speed, humble yourself, acknowledge a lot of the beliefs that you got brought up with in right-wing America are not right, and they're oppressive, and you will benefit eventually from letting go of them. It's hard, and it takes courage, but this community literally is here to help you in that process. You just have to not bash it, because the last thing we want in this community is to put up with the same kind of stuff that we fought our way out of. Does that make sense? All right, so back to the article. Practitioners countering violent extremism and others must keep in mind that misogynist incels are not unique in their misogyny, and take care that interventions do not enable other forms of misogyny as solutions to the incel threat. Understanding misogynist incels as one of several contemporary male supremacist movements. The recommendations made at the end of this brief apply broadly to male supremacist ideological violence. Other acts of violence in 2020 connected to misogynist ideology, but not the misogynist incel movement, include the targeting of a woman federal judge by a men's rights lawyer who frequented male separatist, MG Tao, men going their own way forums. We make 5 key recommendations as a starting point to address threats posed by misogynist incel violence and other forms of male supremacism. 1. Support improved mental health services and access as a social good, but don't mistake this for a solution to ideological violence. 2. Provide possible alternatives for intervention programs and suggest that interventions should draw on examples of programs designed to deal with domestic abuse perpetrators and to counter racist violence for specialized counseling. 3. Avoid interventions that reinforce boys' and men's entitlement. Collaborations with gender justice organizations can strengthen program design. 4. Intervene early and through routine systems to prevent movement along a spectrum of dehumanization and misogyny toward violent extremes. 5. Fund more research and collaborations into male supremacism broadly and protect researchers' ability to work in the face of threats and doxing. So that's the end of that section. And obviously we would note here that this brief is more intended towards social work and mental health practitioners working with people who have some of these issues. But working in a movement setting, you don't necessarily have recourses to the same types of authority. We have to police our own movement, and we need to find ways to do that effectively. I must say, I am heartened by the pushback that all of this, quote, conservative communist stuff has been getting. It actually makes me think that, yes, when we stand up, we can actually get this out of the movement and keep making progress. So that to me is actually very encouraging. Thank you to everyone who has been pushing back on it. So next section of the paper is the introduction. In Santa Barbara, California, in May 2014, a 22-year-old man perpetrated the first attack connected to the Incel community, a group of people who identify as involuntarily celibate due to a claimed inability to find sexual and romantic partners. He set out to kill women at a sorority, but was unable to gain entrance, attacking passers-by instead. At the time, most coverage mistakenly identified the perpetrator as a, quote, failed pickup artist due to his activity in an online forum oriented towards men dissatisfied with the industry that promised to teach them how to seduce women. Quick comment on that, and this is, I guess, mainly geared towards people who are somehow struggling with the concept of the humanity of others for whatever reason. Primarily, although everyone else feel free to weigh in the comments as well. I do moderate the comments so that they're safe for people to express their opinions. I don't allow dogpiling and trolls to dig into people. Anyway, males and females and intersex people of all genders and all sexualities are far more similar than different. We are mostly similar. Some of the differences are exciting and attractive, actually. Some may come off as kind of strange and maybe you don't understand them. But the bottom line is the things that you want and feel, with a few exceptions, many of which have to do with the way that you were raised, the culture of your specific gender. Basically, whoever it is you're looking to as your desired partner, who you see as different, underneath the differences, they're overwhelmingly the same as you. What do people want? People want relationships. They want human contact. They want to be able to talk about who they are and what their dreams are. With the right person who they feel comfortable with, they want sexual contact of some type and extent. There are people who are more on the asexual side, who might just like cuddling or something like that. But in general, people like other people. And the flip side is that people can really hurt other people too. And people are afraid of getting hurt by other people. But we're also interested in connecting with other people because it can feel really good when you make a good connection. So, if you've already got some kind of ideology going about this, everybody has bad experiences. I had bad experiences. And I had to spend a few years undoing the complexes that I built up about it. Then I went back out and things got better. You can do it too. But this whole idea about, entitlement to sex and dehumanization of your would-be partner, this is not an ideology that is going to serve you at all. It's going to leave you feeling empty and alone. And that's what we're talking about here. So back to that article. In 2018, an attack in Toronto, perpetrated by a self-identified incel man, running over and killing 10 people with a van, drew widespread attention from North American media to the incel community for the first time. This attack was followed 6 months later by a misogynist attack on a yoga class in Tallahassee, Florida, by a man who had previously compared himself to the Santa Barbara perpetrator. In the years since, incel communities have captured a piece of the public, academic, and the policy world's imagination. Numerous news pieces, journal articles, policy papers, and other coverage have appeared. However, this attention has carried significant and potentially harmful oversights and misconceptions, beginning with the way that the term incel is used. The heterosexual, cisgender, men-only, misogynist movement, whose growth is of concern now, comment even spreading into the would-be socialist world, now should be differentiated from the original use of the term, which dates to a 1990s gender-neutral community founded by a bisexual woman. The Institute for Research on Male Supremacism recommends the term misogynist incel, similar to the construction of the term racist skinhead, to distinguish the male supremacist ideology and movement from personal identification with the term incel. This term will be used throughout this report. In this policy brief, we explore the history of incel identity and the development of a new misogynist ideology, explaining core concepts related to dehumanization and entitlement, significant frameworks such as the red pill and black pill, and violence as central to the movement ideology. In this brief format, we provide only a short overview of additional issues worthy of extensive analysis, such as race in incel communities. Our focus here is on conveying information most relevant to understanding and addressing potential violence by misogynist incel perpetrators. Comment, so what they're talking about here is right-wing terrorism, basically. But what I'm trying to put out there is we're at a point now where there's so many of these, in my opinion, right-wing minded would-be communists that, I mean, I hope we never see examples of, adventurous terrorism, especially by somebody who thinks that the key to communism is eliminating the soy males from the world. That's just, I mean, honestly, if you follow that guy at all, now is the time to get out. Now is the time to get out. That's a dark path you don't want anything to do with. The paper continues with a content warning. This policy brief analyzes the language used by misogynist, racist, and far-right groups, the intensity of which may be disturbing for some readers. Examples of speech discussed include topics of sexual violence, pedophilia, racist speech, and suicide. Next section is history. As the women's rights movements undermined the patriarchal status quo in the 1970s, the seeds for new ideologies and movements, aiming to reinstate men's dominance, were planted in the US and Canada. Comment. Anybody who's been listening to this channel for a while, what is that time period? The 1970s is the time of the conservative counter-revolution against social democracy. The social democratic programs, which were set up in the 1930s and 1940s, then expanded in the 1960s with the Great Society program, they came under attack from conservatives, Richard Nixon and that whole coalition being a fine example, deciding basically, hey, we don't need to throw bones to the workers anymore. We can just double down and maybe we can keep having our way without making class peace, but instead just becoming extra militant, more fascist, if you will. The Libertarian Party came into being around this exact same time. And then what do we see? The moral majority merging into the Republican Party as part of the Reagan coalition, significant feature of the Reagan coalition in the 80s. It's when neoliberal reforms, quote unquote, when they started pulling back the New Deal, that started in earnest at that time. The economic and the cultural are linked. You can't be a Marxist and try to separate these two. It's just not the way that it works. This is why conservative communism is not, I mean, among other reasons, this is basically why it doesn't work. You can't separate these different kinds of social progress. All right. But that's where it's coming from as part of that counter-revolution that led into neoliberalism. It's, ladies, welcome to the new dark age. We're turning back the clock. It's all part and parcel of the same package. Continuing. This included new secular misogynist ideologies like the men's rights movement, which denies the existence of patriarchy and presents men, not women, as the true victims of sexism and discrimination. Quote, reverse sexism. The so-called seduction industry developed an enterprise to sell seminars and media, promising to teach men how to seduce or pick up women, leading to these men being called pickup artists, PUAs. Women face disproportionate gender-based violence, from domestic abuse to sexual violence to serial killings. Their movements for equality have also been met with violence. Men, including police officers, assaulted women suffragists protesting for their right to vote in the early 1900s, responding to the threat of men's dominance. As the feminist movement further transformed the system of men's control, in 1989, a Canadian man perpetrated the first solo act of mass violence, documented as primarily motivated by misogynist ideology. He stated his motivation for an attack on women engineering students at Montreal's École Polytechnique as, quote, fighting feminism. Until 2020, the 14 women killed marked Canada's most deadly act of violence. So commenting, what's the thing there? It's women entering into STEM, engineering. This is traditionally male, and you find a lot of these super alienated men in there, and their self-esteem is propped up by these kinds of women-hating ideologies. Boom. Now, we don't want to make the liberal mistake, and I just want to make that really clear up front in doing this entire analysis, of reducing class just alongside gender. We know that as Marxists, we don't do that. These are interwoven, however, and this paper does talk about class, and some of that I know towards the end from what I was reading. However, let's talk about what was just said here about men's responses on the ground to women rising up in professional careers and technologically oriented careers. I mean, there were all kinds of forms of pushback in the 70s and 80s to the fruits of liberal feminism, basically women also being able to enter the professional world as doctors and lawyers and, all kinds of other things which had previously been just the province of men, and therefore the cultures of those firms and offices and, really anywhere that women were entering on more of a white collar basis. A lot of men who were more used to that, traditional quote unquote 20th century thing of these environments being a male centric place where they didn't have to watch their language or display any sensitivity whatsoever to the thoughts and feelings of people who were not men. There was a lot of pushback. Obviously, spree killing is one of the most extreme forms you could possibly think up and the most horrific and destructive to life, traumatic for everyone even remotely connected with it. But it didn't all take the form of spree killings, and it doesn't have to in order to be a problem. Throughout the 70s and 80s and into the 90s in particular, there was still this sense that, this could be fought somehow. If just women were harassed enough in different ways, somehow, you could beat back the tide. And this is not the case. Don't buy into any form of it now either. This is just something that has absolutely no place in a post-capitalist society whatsoever. Equality of work, these are all like fundamental concepts. And it's a very reactionary kind of petty bourgeois position to be like, oh, I had more freedom and liberty on the job site before, the women came in and whatever. And then you get this weird sort of angling at co-opting a Marxist talking point by being like, well, see, okay, conservatives used to say, oh, it's the breakdown of the family and this and that. And then people would often mock them saying, well, actually capitalism is what's, driving families to become two-income households and, why women need to go work so that their families don't starve, etc. So it seems like having not accepted that equal work opportunity, having not accepted the basic sexual equality premise, they're now starting to say, well, we're going to take this fascist petty bourgeois outlook of being against the big bourgeoisie because they're driving changes in our society which are undermining the traditional male dominance. Well, guess what? That, quote, traditional male dominance came to you from the big bourgeoisie in the first place. Now their system is just moving further. And, ultimately the way that we resolve the problems of capitalism is socialist revolution. And we end capitalism. And we institute a new society with a new type of government to rule it. But falling into this right populist, petty bourgeois, basically fascist ideology of being anti-feminist and all this other stuff because it's against traditional values, this is anti-worker in every way. All right, continuing. The expansion of internet access and online discussion forums in the 1990s and 2000s enabled new online communities and a wider spread of ideologies, including cross-pollination by users bringing ideas and beliefs across forums. The first PUA forum, alt.seduction.fast, founded in 1994, facilitated the pickup artist industry's expansion to a community subculture. Among the new forums emerging in the 1990s was Alana's Involuntary Celibacy Project, where the term incel was coined. Founded by a bisexual woman in Toronto, the forum aimed to support people who wanted but lacked romantic relationships. While this forum was not designed from a misogynist worldview, the audiences for pickup artists and incel communities overlapped with respect to men dissatisfied with their sexual experience and shaped by the sexual entitlement and dehumanization toward women endemic in society. Comment, note, the dissatisfaction is coming from your cultural capitalist, quote, traditional programming of sexual entitlement and dehumanizing views. That's why you're dissatisfied, because women are people just like you. They're not some magic toy that is going to fix all your problems, correct all your self-esteem issues, and etc. The anonymous forum 4chan, founded in 2003, became another favored space for pickup artists, incels, and varied misogynist and racist perspectives to interact. PUA's belief in a, quote, sexual marketplace influences the misogynistic element of the incel community. According to this framework, every person has a, quote, sexual market value, SMV, informed by characteristics including, but not limited to, physical looks, fitness, age, wealth, and social class. PUA forums claim that feminism brought about and women control this system, seeking men with a higher SMV than their own. This is termed female hypergamy. This leads, they assert, to a distribution of women following the 80-20 rule. 80% of women pursue the top 20% of men, leaving the bottom 20% of women for the remaining 80% of men. PUAs suggest that men improve their SMV by learning, quote, game, techniques to seduce women, earning more money, and or improving their physical appearance through working out. This presents women as shallow, manipulatable, and undeserving of respect or empathy, and men as victims of an unfair feminist system. These beliefs also feed red pill philosophy, discussed later, which, quote, awakens men to the supposed reality of feminist control. In the mid-2000s, game strategies and PUA culture gained pop culture recognition through the best-selling 2005 book, The Game, by journalist Neil Strauss, who immersed himself in PUA culture, followed by a 2007 VH1 reality show, The Pickup Artist. PUA sexual entitlement, objectification of women, and dismissiveness toward consent encourage sexual harassment and assault and have been connected to mass violence. In August 2009, a 48-year-old white man, a devoted follower of the seduction industry, killed 3 women at an aerobics class in Collier Township, Pennsylvania. His blog recounts his justifications for the attack: lack of sexual and romantic relationships, anger at sexually active girls and women, and rejection by all, quote, 30 million single women. Following PUA industry advice, he emphasized working out and financial security, expecting this formula should deliver women. PUA forums, which advise men in coercion and force under euphemisms such as defeating, quote, last-minute resistance, LMR, that is terrible, are rife with personal accounts of actions that amount to committing sexual assault. Yeah. In a rare occurrence in which the perpetrators faced criminal repercussions, 2 instructors with a pickup artist company and their student were convicted for the 2013 rape of a San Diego woman, committed as part of their, quote, boot camp training. Sounds to me like gang behavior, like basically you have to commit a rape in order to get into the gang. Faced with police investigatory negligence, the survivor herself investigated and discovered her assault detailed in the student's online, quote, field report on a PUA forum. PUAHate.com launched a couple of months after the Collier Township attack as a forum for men angry at the PUA industry for failing to deliver, like that's the problem, for failing to deliver the promised results, sex with women, but unsurprisingly became a space for hatred against women. Yeah. Because, commenting, again, you have not changed your core values and expectations. That is the problem. And if you don't, there's that saying, wherever you go, there you are. Well, if you don't change the values, that's what you're bringing with you. And that's what's going to come out. That's going to be everywhere you go. That's what you're spreading. The vitriol toward women attracted incel men who had unsuccessfully attempted PUA techniques and those who had never tried game. One such 22-year-old perpetrated the first attack connected to the incel community, killing 6 people in Santa Barbara in May 2014. He wrote that PUA hate, quote, confirmed many of the theories he had about how wicked and degenerate, comment fascist buzzword, women really are, unquote, and, quote, how bleak and cruel the world is due to the evilness of women, unquote. Comment, substitute soy males, I don't know. PUA hate shut down after the spotlight from the attack, relaunching as sluthate.com, a name that reflected its focus on women, becoming a major forum for misogynist incel men. So comment, talk about not learning the important lesson here. Again, lack of desire to change, those values follow you. Wherever you go, there you are. The Santa Barbara attack marks a point at which the men's misogynist incel ideology begins to coalesce as a separate movement organized online, characterized by dehumanization of women, male sexual entitlement, and glorification of violence. Though little demographic data are available, user surveys and qualitative review suggest that the community comprises mostly boys and men in their teens and 20s, a slight majority of whom are white. Misogynist incels laud the Santa Barbara perpetrator, who killed himself after the attack, as a patron saint and martyr. His autobiographical manifesto became a foundational movement document. While it does not use the term incel, the perpetrator posted on PUAHate.com encouraging incel violence and implying his identification. Quote, if we can't solve our problems, we must destroy our problems, he wrote. Quote, one day incels will realize their true strength and numbers and will overthrow this oppressive feminist system, unquote. Comment, tell me that this is really much different than the tweets that we were looking at earlier. There's nothing vaguely Marxist about them. They don't talk about capitalism or imperialism. They target effeminate men, and there's no specific criteria defined. In fact, we've seen the Giga Chad posited, who's an extreme outlier in terms of his physique and what he's done through bodybuilding that probably takes a regimen of 4 hours a day to do. That is like the ideal. If you can't do that, that is how desperate these people, for whatever reason, whatever they've swallowed, this is how it makes them feel, that if I'm not that guy, or I need to be that guy in order to overcome whatever other self-hating, things I have going on with me. But there's nothing Marxist about it at all. It's not based in any kind of analysis of economics or the exploitation of the working class. None of that. None of it. It's Find me the surplus value mention in there, imperialism, debt traps, nothing. And I think that that's why, when we try to have conversations then about feminism, decolonization, national struggles, it doesn't compute with them. That's fundamentally not where these, quote, conservative communists are coming from. It's not what they're interested in solving. They're using our movement as cover for their own movement that really has more to do with reactionary fascist interests. Continuing. In assessing this movement, it is vital to distinguish identification as an incel, in line with its original meaning, from the misogynist incel ideology that develops later. Men, like women and non-binary people, can identify as incels or involuntarily celibate, or struggle with finding sexual relationships without following male supremacist ideology. For instance, the subreddit r Forever Alone, named after a 4chan meme depicting a man's loneliness, intentionally distanced itself from the misogynist iteration of incel beliefs. Comment, the ML movement absolutely is now in the process of doing that as well. The 2014 Santa Barbara attack was one manifestation of the growth of misogynist online mobilization, as membership of male supremacist forums grew to the tens of thousands. The attack preceded, by just a few months, the well-known Gamergate incident, a harassment campaign that targeted women and feminist video game developers and reviewers under the guise of defending ethics in journalism. It brought initial mainstream media attention to the growth of misogynist and racist mobilization online, which by 2016 would be widely known as the alt-right and part of the support for the election of the then president, Donald Trump. While Gamergate turned mainstream media attention to this phenomenon, it was but a symptom of a mobilization already well underway. Comment, I agree completely. This entire fascist convergence is taking many forms, and it is absolutely funded by some very big money. The Foundational Manifesto. The manifesto and videos created by the Santa Barbara perpetrator present his lack of sexual access to women on demand as not just individual grievance, but an injustice, a frame that is found in both leftist and rightist social movement building. Prior research on mass shooters finds that a sense of entitlement to, quote, take revenge against those who have wronged you, transmutes grievances into violence. Perpetrators need to believe their actions are justified and legitimate. They believe in their own superiority and feel, quote, humiliated by their presumed inferiors, as when the Santa Barbara perpetrator complains that he is treated like a mouse, when in fact he is a god. He claims to be the, quote, true victim, that women and humanity, quote, struck first in, quote, the war, by denying the pleasure to which he felt entitled. He frames not having sexual access to women as a, quote, injustice, a, quote, crime perpetrated against him, emphasizing that his attack is, quote, retribution. References to himself as a, quote, magnificent gentleman and, quote, supreme gentleman underscore his self-image as the hero of the story. Comment, narcissism, this delusional view of yourself as just above every, it's grandiosity. His decision to target a sorority as a symbol of the most sexually desirable and unattainable women, i.e. white, blonde, and attractive. Comment, I would add, also with some social standing, that, girls in a sorority have accepted each other. They're part of this female sisterhood. I think personally that a lot of these misogynist incel types are looking for some amount of social validation, social inclusion, boosting their social status by being in a relationship, and have absolutely no idea how to go about it because of their totally warped view of women as human beings, women as social actors, etc. The perpetrator researched which sorority had, quote, the most beautiful girls, to represent, quote, the kind of girls I've always desired, but was never able to have because they all look down on me, unquote. The manifesto states the desire to inspire terror in women, quote, I cannot kill every single female on earth, but I can deliver a devastating blow that will shake all of them to the core of their wicked hearts, unquote. That's dramatic. much actually like the Twitter and Twitch user we were posting screenshots of earlier, who frequently makes posts that sound like an anime villain monologue. Unable to gain access to the selected target on the day of his attack, the perpetrator opened fire on nearby pedestrians. Dehumanization of women in multiple forms is central to the misogynist incel community and a pervasive aspect of the Santa Barbara Manifesto. This should raise significant concern as research by the Dangerous Speech Project finds that dehumanization is a hallmark of dangerous speech that paves the way for ideological extremist violence by stripping away inhibitions for carrying out violence and removing victims from moral consideration. Core to male sexual entitlement is a dehumanizing view of women as objects to serve men. This instrumentality has been identified as, quote, the defining feature of objectification. Let's read it again. Core to male sexual entitlement is a dehumanizing view of women as objects to serve men. Objectified people are reduced to things, to possessions, to be owned, to be a means to goals. Sexual objectification specifically, quote, reduces women to their appearance, body, or individual body parts. This leads to a perception of women as interchangeable with others possessing the same physical characteristics. The Santa Barbara perpetrator refers repeatedly to blondes, depicted as interchangeable and non-unique, as the focus of his desire, demonstrating an obsession with white women. At one point, he describes, quote, giving the female gender one last chance to provide me with the pleasures I deserved from them, unquote. The phrasing of expectation that the female gender should provide sexual pleasure evokes objectification and instrumentality. He views women as wronging him by not performing their function, sexual gratification. The manifesto also approaches women with a mix of animalistic dehumanization and demonization, asserting, quote, women are vicious, evil. Well, we heard that one earlier. Evil, barbaric animals, and they need to be treated as such, unquote. The manifesto states that women, quote, think like beasts, and in truth, they are beasts. Women are incapable of having morals or thinking rationally, unquote. Animalistic dehumanization stimulates feelings of contempt and disgust and is commonly deployed in support of genocide. The Santa Barbara perpetrator imagines a, quote, pure world where women are put in concentration camps. Wow. To be, quote, deliberately starved to death, using those who survive for, quote, breeding. Commenting, I would say there's more than a little bit of fascist overlap there, yeah. Obsession with purity is another hallmark of dangerous speech. Demonization amps up dehumanization to the level of a crusade, for instance, calling on incels to, quote, overthrow this oppressive feminist system. It, quote, creates moral justification to act against a group perceived as inherently and irredeemably evil. Violence against the target not only becomes justified, but a moral good, even an imperative. Men the Santa Barbara perpetrator perceives as sexually successful appear as secondary targets in his rhetoric. The perpetrator dehumanizes popular men as pleasure-seeking brutes and refers to both men and women with statements like, quote, you are animals and I will slaughter you like animals. Despite being half Asian himself, the perpetrator expresses heightened rage when he sees, quote, inferior black, Latino, or, quote, full-blooded Asian men with white women and claims, quote, I deserve it more as a, quote, descendant of British aristocracy. Increasing rhetoric of dehumanization. The themes found in the Santa Barbara Manifesto have been picked up, elaborated on, and evolved in new directions in misogynist incel discourse. A sluthate.com comment 6 months after the 2014 attack on a thread about, quote, incel shooting sprees, explicitly stated the instrumentality toward and commoditization of women's bodies, asserting that every person deserves to have basic needs met, like food, shelter, and, quote, if you are a male, sexual access to attractive females that is considered a basic need for men as well, unquote. New objectifying terms in the guise of memes developed, growing through the online forum 4chan. The, quote, beautiful blondes of the Santa Barbara Manifesto are exemplified by the meme of Stacy's, sexually desirable, high SMV, white women stereotyped as blonde and curvy. Meanwhile, quote, attractive, popular men who are sexually successful with women are memed as Chads. The 2018 Toronto van attack perpetrator called for the overthrow of Chads and Stacys. Imagine wasting your life on this. Memes are often taken as not serious, ironic, or humorous, but they also can be assessed as forms of objectification. All sexually desirable women are so interchangeable that they are given the same name, a term that reduces them to a set of sexualized physical characteristics. Another meme, Becky, refers to women viewed as less desirable, but more attainable. However, this term appears infrequently in misogynist incel forums. Even Chads are interchangeable and defined by appearance, significant given that such men have been secondary targets for violence. Misogynist incels have been racialized and racist terms for non-white Chads. The most used such term, Tyrone, refers to black men who are viewed as having a sexual advantage with women. Comment, this just goes back to classic forms of bigotry, have nothing to do with socialism whatsoever, are in fact everything that we are fighting against when we fight against capitalism, a world where people aren't viewed like this and where ideologies like this, which dehumanize people, working people, are not propagated by the ruling structure. That's what we're looking for here, okay. Two other disparaging terms popularized through 4chan are used frequently by misogynist incels as well as the alt-right, normies and cucks. The word cuck, shortened from cuckold, a man whose wife or partner is sexually unfaithful, disparages certain men as servile, submissive, and weak. Cucks, Chads, Stacys, and Beckys are all normies, men and women viewed as conforming to society, i.e. normal, non-incels. This categorization sets up an in-group, out-group dynamic that's also characteristic of dangerous speech. Misogynist incel men have voiced support for violence committed even by non-incels because the victims were normies. For instance, our Incels posters lauded the 2017 Las Vegas shooter who killed 58 people attending a concert for killing normies, sympathizing and identifying with the perpetrator, even though he had a live-in girlfriend and was not an incel. Comment, this is just part of the general misanthropy that starts to develop after a while. These people are full of hate. While most studies and media on incels have focused on the terms Chads and Stacys as distinguishing the community, this does not accurately reflect the severity and popularity of dehumanization toward women in contemporary misogynist incel forums. Mechanistic dehumanization, not significant in the Santa Barbara Manifesto, has become central to misogynistic incel rhetoric, reducing women to machines with no capacity for emotion. This, quote, sanitizes violence against the target, so that killing is reduced to, quote, pulling the plug of an inanimate object. In fact, sometimes denying the other group the ability to feel any emotion may motivate excusing one's own collective abuses against them, unquote. It is similar to objectification in perceiving its targets as interchangeable and instrumental. The terms femoid or foid, abbreviations for female humanoid or female humanoid organism, have far outpaced the use of the term Stacy. On incels.co, foid is used 4 times as often as Stacy. Yet Chad remains the primary term for, quote, sexually successful men. While other men can be targets, women are the focus of misogynist incel dehumanization and violence. Beyond the memes and ubiquitous mechanistic dehumanization, misogynist incel men have developed an array of other dehumanizing and derogatory terms for women. In particular, objectifying language refers to women by demeaning terms for their genitalia, most popular roasties, a vulgar way of describing labia, or just reduces women to holes. Comment there. So the whole roasties thing, there is a common incel belief, which has nothing to do with biology whatsoever. You know, the video I posted yesterday of somebody being asked how many, orifices below the waist does a woman have, and getting the answer wrong. This is right in line with that. So the roasties thing, incels say that the more sex women have, the more the inner and outer labia, the folds of skin that cover the vaginal orifice, get stretched out. That's not what fucking happens. That's really not what happens at all. But, again, this is total alienation. These are like, I wonder, it's like, have these people spent any time around women whatsoever? Anyway, on incels.co, roasty appears almost as much as Stacy. Terms for women considered undesirable for lacking idealized physical features include animalistic epithets, for example, land whales, and racist epithets such as noodle whores, a term for Asian women. To give a sense of how common basic dehumanization is when making reference to women, femoids or foids alone are used a third as frequently as the neutral terms women, woman, or girls on incels.co. Promotion and glorification of violence. Following the 2014 attack, positive references to the Santa Barbara perpetrator, such as Supreme Gentleman, which he called himself, as a saint, became popular in misogynist incel spaces such as sluthate.com, 4chan, and later incels.co, encouraging others to, quote, go ER, the initials of the Santa Barbara perpetrator, meaning to commit mass murder and then kill oneself, is one of the many ways violence is promoted and glorified. Misogynist incels celebrate the anniversary of the attack, May 23, as the perpetrator's Saint's Day. Supporters have lamented that the perpetrator failed to gain access to the sorority and kill more women as planned, and suggested other targets, for instance, a post advocating, quote, if incels go ER, they should target feminists. Gender studies class would be a good location to go ER, unquote. Mass fear and intimidation through violence is often promoted as the only means of achieving change for inceldom. See the black pill section later on for more on this. Glorification of men's violence, whether perpetrated by an incel or not, has become a distinguishing characteristic of the misogynist incel movement, as with the support for the 2017 Las Vegas shooting. Posts tagged as life fuel often celebrate interpersonal or mass violence against women or normies. Comment, I think it also speaks to the basically suicidally depressed outlook of a lot of these hate-filled people. Such posts range from sharing news articles about cases of sexual violence or murder of women to the celebration of school shootings or mass killings of normies. Moonshot CVE tracked 3 categories of interpersonal violence that appear on incel forums. Quote, violent criminal behavior, including violence against women, actions to emotionally hurt or humiliate women, and actions to make women physically uncomfortable and fearful, unquote. Quote, based, which they define as, quote, not caring about being politically correct, though can also be understood as calling something awesome or righteous, is also used to approve of interpersonal violence. Misogynist incels claim a number of men who committed attacks before widespread use of the term incel, such as the Oklahoma City bomber and the Virginia Tech shooter, as sharing their identity and as saints or heroes, or HEROS. The shared features of most of the chosen saints are men who perpetuated mass violence, had demonstrated some form of violence or animosity toward women, and in some cases had a history of isolation or social exclusion. Comment, basically reactionary violence. Misogynist incel men have advocated for the legalization of violent actions to punish and control women, such as rape and beating. Comment, I've seen this in the Christian libertarian world, so yeah, that is pervasive. Posts have suggested legalized violence against women partners as a justified response to disobedience, not providing sex, or otherwise failing to, quote, fulfill their feminine role. This aligns them with elements of the PUA and red pill movements that defend and seek to legalize violence against women. Nostalgia for traditional gender norms, for a past in which women were coerced by societal structure into marriage as a means of support, pervades male supremacist ideologies. Jordan Peterson, a psychologist and professor at the University of Toronto and an ideologue popular with red pill adherents, advocated the concept of enforced monogamy as the, quote, cure for mass violence, like the 2018 Toronto van attack, driven by anger over women's rejection. Comment, in other words, give the fascists what they want. That's basically Peterson's position. This appeals to misogynist incels as a means of overcoming the 80-20 rule and distributing women one to each man. Another disturbing development in the past few years has been rhetoric supporting pedophilia. Some misogynist incel men attempt to justify pedophilia by stating that underage girls, particularly preteen, are more likely to be, quote, pure by not yet having had sexual contact and are easier to influence and control. And this is clearly what they're looking for. They claim that being with a pure girl is the only way to truly, quote, ascend inceldom, as women who have had previous sexual relationships are tainted, and sex with them borders on being cuckolded. Nate, what a fragile concept of their own identity they must have. Nathan Larson, creator of misogynist sites including Incel Apocalypse and, quote, Raping Girls is Fun, and an active participant on other misogynist incel forums, is a major promoter of pedophilia and rape. He also ran for Congress in 2018 to promote this agenda. Comment, he was a libertarian. The acceptance of Larson in these spaces, which practice gatekeeping around incel identity, despite not being an incel, suggests that his misogynist content and agenda was valued. On incels.co, he regularly posted advocating the legalization of pedophilia, incest, and rape, until being banned for infighting. Comment, yeah, so like I said, fascist convergence, there is a convergence of reactionary interests with overlapping views on these kinds of subjects. Red pill to black pill. The red pill, a term that comes from the 1999 film The Matrix, has become a framework for individuals to describe their awakening to some previously hidden supposed reality. The major contemporary secular male supremacist movements, PUAs, men's rights activists, the red pill, and men going their own way, all use this terminology to describe their, quote, realization that men do not hold systemic power or privilege. Comment, now, as socialists, we obviously recognize the struggle against capitalism as our primary fight, but we also know that capitalism is a patriarchal system, and this has been discussed since the very beginning of Marx and Engels, so yeah, recognizing that is fairly key. Instead, they awaken to the, quote, truth that socially, economically, and sexually, men are at the whims of women's, and feminists, power and desires. As in the film, to be blue-pilled is to accept the mainstream narrative and choose to live in ignorance of the truths of the world. Red pillers see themselves as intellectually superior to, quote, blue-pilled normies. The red pill terminology grew in male supremacist forums and was adopted more broadly by far-right and white supremacist groups to describe their own versions of awakenings, conspiracist worldviews that often overlap with male supremacist positions, such as anti-feminism. Beginning around 2016, misogynist incel forums began to shift from a red pill to an increasing black pill mentality. This belief system accepts the red pill view of society dominated by women, but rejects individual-level attempts, such as learning game, to achieve a sexual relationship with women as misguided, asserting that only change at a societal level, God, this is so crazy and twisted, has the possibility to be effective. Black pill adherents believe that looks are genetically determined and that women choose sexual partners based solely on physical features, quote, lookism. So whether a person will be an incel or not is predetermined. Misogynist incels attempt to prove the truth of the black pill through misreadings of scientific studies, online dating datasets, and their own, quote, experiments to prove that women only care about a man's physical looks. Although some incels still seek out plastic surgery, workout, quote, gym maxing, or try to otherwise improve their physical features, many believe such strategies are pointless, as inceldom is a problem with society, not the individual. Comment, I believe that this may be the point where some of them start trying to pass themselves off as Marxists. Black-pilled incels are aware of appearance and sociability or game strategies and reject them, as solutions. The black pill philosophy typically offers only two options for what to do with their new accepted reality: accept their fate as an incel or try to change society to their benefit, usually advocated as potentially achievable by means of mass violence and terror, not politics or other methods of change. Quote, copes are looked down on as methods of coping without changing the unjust system, including denying the reality of the black pill. For those who choose to accept their black-pilled fate, suicide is often presented as the most inevitable solution. It is also encouraged in misogynist incel communities as a form of sacrificial violence and/or martyrdom. Incels talk about potential self-harm, giving up hope, or suicide by using phrases such as, quote, rope, committing suicide by hanging oneself, quote, Eldar, lay down and rot, or, quote, suifuel, suicide fuel. Suifuel, it's over, brutal, and it never began are popular responses to and tags for posts that members feel exemplify the truth of the black pill. Internal polls shared on incels.co have asked members when they think they will rope. In some cases, users explicitly state, I have to kill myself, or say that they will commit suicide by the time they are a certain age if they're still an incel. Comment, why do you want to go out and put that onto a girl or woman? Why do you want to make... It's not her problem. It's honestly your problem. This is your problem. And you need to get treatment so that you can try relating to other human beings differently. You know, if you come from a trauma or abuse situation which gave you some of these views, in other words, if it's not just cultural entitlement, but you have other kinds of self-esteem issues going on separate from that, those things are treatable. You can improve your outlook, and you can improve your social skills, and you can improve your general ability to socialize and make friends. It is hard in this world, and we have seen studies that overall, in the last few decades, Americans, that was what the study was on, US Americans have fewer friends than they did 10 or 20 years ago, like by a significant amount. The world is becoming atomized. People are spending so much time online or working odd hours or whatever it is, just afraid of people. We live in an environment of fear and insecurity. People doubt themselves, all kinds of stuff. It's not just you, but anyway, reach out. Don't go to these fucking black hole of doom and despair type of sites. Get involved in movements that are going to be self-destructive as well as socially destructive. Don't do it. There are better options. While some fellow members respond to suicidal comments with sympathy, others urge posters on with harmful comments, asking those who have expressed suicidal ideation why they're still posting and haven't yet attempted it. When active members stop posting for an extended period of time, this frequently leads to forum speculation that they have committed suicide. However, that absence could instead represent men withdrawing from that online community, and these data are not currently available to ascertain what is occurring. Regardless, there is a substantial difference between a community being vulnerable to self-harm and promoting and threatening violence against others. Members expressing suicidal ideation on misogynist incel forums are also encouraged to go ER, or be a hero, ER capitalized, meaning to commit mass murder before committing suicide. Comment, this in some societies is the phenomenon called running amok. It's a form of public suicide which also involves violence against others. I mean, anyone who is a witness to violence is also a victim of violence. That includes suicide, but it's also active, more active physical harm in that case. Many misogynist incels don't just advocate for suicide as a solution to inceldom, but also to create structural change through first committing mass violence. As with the Santa Barbara perpetrator, martyrdom is revered. The Toronto van attacker told police he had hoped to commit, quote, suicide by cop, a common plan for perpetrators of mass violence. For black pill adherents seeking to change society rather than simply accept their fate, the use of mass violence to forcibly overthrow the system and force normies to take notice is positioned as a key pathway to structural change. A November 2014 sluthate.com thread on, quote, incel shooting sprees demonstrates the roots of this thinking, arguing that such mass bloodshed is, quote, the only way that sluts and alphas will realize and accept that there are serious consequences for allowing so many males to live their lives in misery, unquote. This use of mass violence to create social change in favor of incels' worldview has been referred to as the, quote, incel rebellion or, quote, beta uprising. The 2018 Toronto van attack perpetrator stated that the, quote, incel rebellion has already begun in a Facebook post just prior to his attack, and 2 days before he had posted on 4chan that, quote, there would be another beta uprising. Misogynist incels that glorify violence posit that by eliminating women and chads, they are working to, quote, purify society and to frighten those who have not taken the red pill or the black pill. A brief overview of intersections with race and class. Another component of the black pill is the claimed realities of racial hierarchy in the pursuit of sexual and romantic relationships. In misogynist incel communities, the acronym JBW, Just Be White, is a popular expression of white men's perceived sexual advantages. Data released by dating websites and applications that point to a preference for white men over other ethnicities are pointed to as evidence of all women's racism, another justification for dehumanizing women. A catch-all label, ethnic cells, refers to non-white incels, with posts that aim to scientifically prove the undesirability of non-white men in the West and beyond. The, quote, scientific black pill draws on studies that have shown how black and Latino men are hypersexualized and viewed as hypermasculine, while Asian men are desexualized and seen as feminine or weak in Western countries. In incel communities, labels such as rice cell, an East or Southeast Asian incel, or curry cell, a South Asian incel, are used to refer to the struggles of these incels as unique, pointing out their physical undesirability and emasculation. The Santa Barbara perpetrator, who had a white father and an Asian mother, is presented as evidence that Asian men are viewed as less attractive in Western countries, and to claim that mixed-race people, particularly men, are more mentally unstable as a result of the what? These beliefs are presented as justification for the violent acts he committed, faulting women and a, quote, degenerate society that allowed for emasculation of Asian men and, quote, race mixing. Their perspectives on race both demonstrate the influence of white supremacist beliefs, and are used as ground to further justify violence by non-white men. A 2020 member survey of a misogynist incel forum found that the majority of respondents were young men under 25 living with their parents while working or attending school. The class dimension of incel communities has been a subject of speculation, particularly the use of the term NEET, N-E-E-T, quote, not in employment, education, or training. However, evidence to demonstrate that economic strain motivates incel misogyny and violence is lacking. The term NEET does not necessarily relate at all to sexual activity. Men who do not identify as incel call themselves NEET on online forums like 4chan, and the majority of incels do work or attend school. So commenting, this reminds me somewhat of the recent discussion about MAGA and the embracing of Donald Trump's very reactionary agenda as, quote, economic anxiety. And then, of course, the pushback on that was people asserting it's less about economic anxiety and it's more about sensitive entitlement, whether it's, racial entitlement, the idea of the white male breadwinner, that is falling away, that used to be something that the bourgeoisie put out there as part of their labor hierarchy that, that helped them enforce their order. So anyway, these sort of cultural versus economic considerations. We know as Marxists that culture is produced, all ideology is produced by the mode of production, like by the system, because that's what it's doing to perpetuate itself. However, we're trying to differentiate that here from just raw economic data, how much money is in somebody's pocket. All right. Anecdotes describing NEET in misogynist incel forums indicate that it can be in part a choice to opt out from the economy as part of a black pill mentality, permitting young men with familial safety nets to choose not to pursue employment as irrelevant to their incel status. Similarly, the term ELDAR can be less suggestive of suicidal ideation and more of refusing to take an active part in society in the face of perceived systemic injustice. Comment, so basically it's just like being a professional slacker. And, there's plenty of people who adopt that kind of view that don't turn into raging, homicidal, suicidal misogynists. In fact, this is not even exclusive to men. I mean, as women have been entering the workforce more and more, there's also a lot of slacking among women as well. I mean, this sort of response to a system where you can't get ahead, it's not exclusive to men. And again, it's just, I think part of this tunnel vision, men not relating to women, not seeing the similarities, only the differences, where humanity is even recognized in the first place. But yeah, we live in an environment now in neoliberalism with declining opportunities to secure a union job, have any kind of dignity at work, to even make enough to live on at work. I mean, we're seeing now the great resignation, people just not bothering with a lot of these jobs because what's the point of working for $11 or $12 an hour when you're going to be like starving literally with what rents are and everything. I think we're in kind of a crisis situation with the economy here in November 2021. That's beyond the scope of this particular article, but worth mentioning. Anyway, I draw again upon this notion of the black pill, having some sort of pseudo, at least, social awareness, or trying to look for social solutions to some of these situations. I wonder if that's more the realm where these people entering the Marxist world badly are coming from. Continuing. On the other hand, when considering the potential impact of economic status, higher class status may increase. See, this is exactly what I was talking about with the whole MAGA entitlement thing. On the other hand, when considering the potential impact of economic status, higher class status may increase a sense of entitlement for those adhering to a red pill philosophy that views wealth as part of their sexual market value. The Santa Barbara perpetrator described attending red carpet premieres thanks to his director father. His parents paid for his college tuition, rent, car, and a monthly allowance of $500, plus monetary gifts from grandparents, which he saved to buy the guns for the attack. Comment, they must be proud. Given that he dropped out of school and did not work, he could be categorized as neat, but this would certainly not imply his class privilege accurately. He viewed women's inattention, even with his expensive car and designer clothes, as part of the injustice against him, suggesting that money increased his expectation and feeling of entitlement. So commenting, this is a little bit different from the sort of, blue-collar union worker breadwinner who no longer has that position in the labor aristocracy. This is more like upper middle, maybe even lower upper class. But again, that sense of entitlement, it comes out of the system that tells you there is a hierarchy, you're here, you deserve XYZ, and when you're pumped full of that and you don't question it ever, then you can wind up feeling like, you got left empty-handed. And if you're narcissistic and messed up in the head enough, or, you just get into one of these forums and get messed up in the head enough, socialized by all these other right-wingers around you, to start thinking twisted, violent thoughts as a means of correcting this situation. Well, yeah, fascism is growing. What can I say? I think it's going to keep growing. Like I said, there is money behind it. It's honestly up to us to push back. And if we don't want a purely fascist future, we have to push back on it and organize something else and protect that something else until we are big enough to actually go after the system at the actual source, which is the private control of industry and financing and all of it. The actual source of war, the actual source of genocide, the actual source of all of this stuff. Okay. Mass violence and terrorism since Santa Barbara. Since 2014, multiple perpetrators of mass violence and attempted violence in the United States and Canada have referenced the Santa Barbara perpetrator or have been connected to misogynist incel ideology. In the first couple of years following the attack, there was one serious thwarted threat of mass violence and one successful attack that referenced the 2014 attack. In 2015, the Santa Barbara perpetrator was praised in the manifesto of the Umpqua Community College shooter, who also wrote about his own lack of sexual relationships. In December 2017 and February 2018, two mass shootings occurred in which the perpetrators had mentioned the Santa Barbara perpetrator positively online, though without indication that misogynist incel ideology motivated them. The media awareness of incels changed with the April 2018 Toronto van attack by a perpetrator who explicitly wrote before killing 10 people, quote, "The incel rebellion has already begun. We will," oh my God, so lame and sad. And this guy killed people based off of this. "We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the supreme gentleman," Santa Barbara perpetrator. While most of these perpetrators of mass violence killed themselves at the end of their attacks, running amok, the Toronto van perpetrator survived and went on to describe his knowledge of misogynist incel ideology in a police interview. He is now undergoing trial. This attack was followed 6 months later by a 40-year-old man who had compared his younger self to the Santa Barbara perpetrator, opened fire at a yoga class in Tallahassee, Florida, killing 2 women, cementing the new attention to the ideology. Anytime perpetrators choose spaces associated symbolically with young, attractive women, such as a sorority or a yoga class, that suggests a misogynist and potentially terrorist motivation, similar to the targeting of synagogues or mosques to represent anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim ideologies. Law enforcement in the United States began to pay more attention to incels following, what can you say here? Military and law feminists to pay more attention to incels following the June 2019 shooting, no fatalities, at the Earl Cabell Federal Building in Dallas, Texas, by a perpetrator who had posted memes associated with incel communities. Comment, but what I mean by that is we're looking to a system which promotes these ideologies to try to end that's not to say that reform is never helpful. It definitely is. It's just as long as the capitalists are in power, the clock is kind of ticking on this stuff coming back. Continuing. In Canada, another attack in Toronto in February 2020, in which a man used a machete to kill 1 woman and injure another who worked at Crown Spa Erotic Massage, was charged for the first time as incel extremist terrorism. In May 2020, at the Westgate Shopping Center in Arizona, a man shot 3 people while live streaming video before being arrested. None of those victims died. He identified himself as an incel who had been rejected by women seeking to target couples to make them feel his pain. In June 2020, a Virginia bomb maker was arrested after injuring himself with his own explosives. Investigators found a letter imagining targeting hot cheerleaders with the statement, quote, "I will not be afraid of the consequences. No matter what, I will be heroic. I will make a statement like Elliot Rodgers did," unquote. While focused on North America, as thus far related mass violence has been geographically circumscribed, the online nature of this movement facilitates its influence across countries with English-speaking populations and should be approached as a transnational threat. Comment, this is exactly what we see with the far-right international convergence. It is absolutely global. In 2020, for instance, a bomb maker connected to the misogynist incel movement was arrested in Britain, and a recent report by the Swedish Defense Research Institute found that the United States and United Kingdom were the most common nationalities across incel forums, but that Sweden had the most participants on a per capita ratio, per number population. The question of whether to label acts of misogynist incel violence as terrorism has been ongoing. Namely, the debate centers around both what movements and acts are included under the definition of terrorism, as well as the discussions over the pros and cons of labeling a group or an act terrorist. Not all attacks perpetrated by misogynist incels should be categorized as terrorist acts. However, acts of mass violence with clear ideological motivations and goals, like the 2014 Santa Barbara attack and 2018 Toronto van attack, fit the category of terrorism. The Santa Barbara perpetrator makes clear that because he, quote, cannot kill every single female on Earth, he plans an attack to create fear and hopes to inspire others. Though misogynist incels are often perceived as a movement without political aims, violent perpetrators have the same type of far-reaching aims that white nationalists have: to completely change the culture and politics of society to favor their own group. Hence the Jordan Peterson thing from before, my comment. Political ideas supported by misogynist incels range from concentration camps for women to mandating government-sponsored girlfriends and enforced monogamy to wiping out most of the existing, quote, alpha men and women. The Santa Barbara perpetrator had his own vision for an ideal society that his manifesto conveys. The specifics of a political agenda are not cohesively developed for the overall movement. However, they see themselves as an oppressed group that can only improve their situation through a total overthrow and restructuring of society. While incels have taken up a prominent place in popular consciousness since 2018, approaches that remain aware of other forms of male supremacism will be more effective. Some mainstream journalists have erred in attempting to connect unrelated misogynist violence in Europe and North America to incels. In the case of the February 2020 attack in Hanau, Germany, by a far-right perpetrator, some outlets rushed to claim the attacker was an incel because of a passage in his manifesto stating that he had not been in a relationship with a woman for 18 years. The manifesto demonstrated misogynist beliefs, but not a connection to incel ideology. As scholars Greta Yasser, Megan Kelly, and Anne-Catherine Rothermel have written, this focus only on incels obscures the extent to which male supremacism and misogyny animates beliefs and violence outside that specific environment. Recommendations. The first step in addressing misogynist incel violence and terrorism is recognizing the problem for what it is, a form of male supremacism. Since 2018, law enforcement in the United States and Canada have taken steps to include misogynist incels in their threat assessments. Some commenters have opposed Canada's recent categorization of incel ideological violence as terrorism, arguing that it gave too much attention and significance to a fringe movement. Yet 2 out of 3 of the largest acts of mass violence in Canada's history, I guess if you don't want to count the genocide of Indigenous peoples and then the ongoing colonization, right, were motivated primarily by misogynist ideology. Yet, significant issues exist with how misogynist incel ideology is currently approached in CVE that may make interventions targeted at the misogynist incel community not only ineffective, but also risk further endangering women. We advance alternate understandings and responses for addressing misogynist incel violence more effectively and without doing harm. 1. Support improved mental health services and access as a social good, but do not mistake this for a solution to ideological violence. Suicide rates in the world, and in the US in particular, have increased in the past 20 years, and loneliness has been declared a public health issue. Adequate universal mental health care access falls far short, and increased access to therapy and other services is a social good, including for self-identified incels, men, women, and non-binary people, and anyone dealing with depression, loneliness, or other mental health issues. However, we caution against approaching mental health issues as the main driver of misogynist violence or therapeutic treatment as a solution. A 2020 Counterterrorism Journal article exemplifies the approach of recommending mental health services to prevent incel violence, stating, quote, arguably, the most effective way to prevent an incel from going ER is by proactively addressing his suicidal impulses, unquote. This is a misplaced focus. While many mass violence perpetrators intend to kill themselves or commit suicide by cop at the end of their attack, potentially to avoid imprisonment, the Santa Barbara and Toronto van attack perpetrators cited this as their main reason. This isn't always the case. In the misogynist, incel-connected attacks in 2020, the perpetrators did not attempt to kill themselves. Ideologically motivated violence, thus, can occur without perpetrators committing self-harm. Comment I would add, or intending self-harm. There are decades of examples of white supremacist, anti-abortion, and other ideological violence unconnected to suicide attempts. Second, the focus on mental health treats loneliness and depression as the root cause of incel violence, rather than misogyny and male entitlement. Yet for most populations, impulses towards self-harm do not manifest in a decision to kill others. Avoid reinforcing misogynist incel men's sense of being the only people who truly experience suffering. Vulnerable populations at the highest risk for attempted suicide and depression, for instance, queer young people, do not perpetrate mass violence. Entitlement, superiority, and a feeling of moral justification animate perpetrators of mass violence, who are most often cisgender, heterosexual, white men. Last, mental health services are not designed to treat ideology, because misogyny, supremacism, and other harmful ideologies are not mental health issues. So, while many misogynist incel men refuse therapy as an ineffective solution to what they view as systemic problems, others tried therapy but retained their misogynist ideology and returned to the online communities. The Santa Barbara perpetrator received extensive mental health support and therapy due to his parents, including meeting a weekly counselor in an informal social setting to address his, quote, loneliness. He responded dismissively, maintaining his worldview, quote, I don't know why my parents wasted money on therapy, as it will never help me in my struggle against such a cruel and unjust world, unquote. So commenting, yeah, if a person is not seeking therapy, if they're not desiring to change, but probably his parents just, noticed that he was acting in ways that probably were disturbing, sent him to therapy as some condition of his allowance or whatever, and he didn't want to be there, didn't get invested in it, didn't want to change. So he didn't. When I recommended earlier, if people are struggling with this, that's before you get to the stage of soaking up the ideology, or if you are questioning it, etc. If you want help, yeah, and you want to change, there are options. But just putting somebody who's ideologized into therapy is not going to deprogram them necessarily. A misplaced focus on mental health issues as leading to violence can also harm how people with depression or other psychological conditions are perceived. For instance, autistic advocacy groups have spoken out against claims blaming autism for attacks. Comment, you see that in the case of the big the name of the attack in Connecticut, the big mass shooting. The name is escaping me right now, but that was a case of, autism being blamed, and then that stigmatizes all people with autism of like, oh, are you dangerous? No, there was other things going on. Also, just recently, when I did a video about Caleb Maupin threatening to sue the CPUSA on Twitter, I had a commenter trying to tell me that, oh, he's a good guy, he's just autistic. And I'm like, you're literally just doing the anyway, it's the exact same thing. You can't just say, oh, somebody's mentally, because the vast majority of people with some kind of mental illness are never violent and don't act destructively in these kinds of ways to other people. So it's different, and we really need to focus on that. Continuing, we recommend funders support policies to increase the quality of and access to mental health services, including improvements in training regarding recognizing and addressing misogynist, dehumanizing, and abusive belief systems, with input from mental health advocacy groups, especially those led by the communities they serve, without pushing this as a solution to misogynist violence. 2. Instead, interventions should draw on examples of programs designed to deal with domestic abuse perpetrators and to counter racist violence for specialized training. Acts of misogynist mass violence exist on a continuum alongside other gender-based harassment and violence, including intimate partner abuse, stalking, rape, and murder. Perpetrators of mass violence, virtually always men, acting from any ideological motivation, usually have in common histories of abuse or harassment of women. The Santa Barbara perpetrator began by harassing women on the street, including throwing drinks from his car. Comment, street harassment is a whole issue on itself. You can find extensive research papers about that. Recommendations for dealing with potential incel violence have suggested helping these men form intimate relationships with women, with the expectation that this will mitigate their, quote, desire for dominance, but without addressing the underlying misogynist beliefs. This endangers potential women partners. Comment, absolutely. Like I said before, if you don't change that underlying value, you're bringing that in. People have to actually change. And there's many people with these roots going pretty deep at this point. I mean, as for women's experience of this whole situation, I know I've talked to many women where it's like they see that Jordan Peterson book on the shelf on the first date. It's time to make that the last date. I mean, this just creates such an incredibly dangerous environment for women. It just sets up men to treat women really horribly. And again, women are doing what all people are programmed to do. We're social creatures. They're trying to go out and seek human interaction and meaningful relationships and intimacy. And things like this just create such a dangerous environment for women. In online posts, misogynist incels have expressed that violence against women partners would be justified for failing to meet their sexual or other expectations. While they voice anger at lacking sexual relationships with women, their worldview demonstrates similarities with that of intimate partner abuse perpetrators, sort of abuser in waiting. Domestic abuse perpetrators feel entitled and wronged when they do not get what they want, and justified in acting violently in response, seeing themselves as victims when women do not conform to their expectations. They hold hostile, sexist beliefs and endorse traditional gender roles. Threats to commit suicide are used as part of an abusive toolkit for manipulating and controlling victims. Shifting the sphere of potential violence from the public sphere to private is not a successful intervention. We recommend funding programming to address misogynist incel men that learns not only from existing de-radicalization programs aimed at extremist ideologies, which have benefits and flaws, but also from domestic abuse perpetrator intervention programs. These programs confront beliefs such as male entitlement, strict gender roles, and ownership of women. They recognize that mental health issues can exist concurrently with, but are separate from, abusive behavior, and they require appropriate approaches to address each issue without conflating them. 3. Avoid interventions that reinforce boys' and men's entitlement. Collaborations with gender justice organizations can strengthen program design. Suggested interventions that encourage misogynist incel men to learn better social skills and take care of their appearance lean in the direction of PUA arguments that incel violence could be avoided if only the perpetrator learned game. In both cases, the intended outcome, explicit or not, is to prevent violence by helping misogynist incel men to form sexual relationships and leave inceldom behind. Black-pilled incels refuse such personal solutions as ineffective. Those open to maxing, self-improvement, end up in another culture based on objectification and misogyny towards women. Comment: go back to the Giga Chad. I'm not saying Giga Chad is, I'm saying those who worship Giga Chad definitely seem to be in this sort of maxing type of headspace. Like, oh, if I can only work out 9 hours a day, then I will be worth something. Yeah, no. Not receiving the expected outcome, sexual access to women, from utilizing these techniques in the past has further reinforced and radicalized misogynist incel beliefs. In 2020, a competition held at Arizona State University encouraged student-designed projects to combat hate speech and related violence. The winner was a proposed youth intervention program. A video created to advertise the program shows how well-meaning approaches can reinforce boys' and men's entitlement. The video depicts a scenario in which a boy texts a girl asking her out, is declined, and then insults her directly and to a friend. The second scenario shows what the program teaches should be done, using, quote, emotional intelligence, self-concept, and healthy coping skills. The boy wishes the girl well, asks out someone else, and she accepts. This reinforces an unhealthy narrative of an expected reward structure, that the reason for basic decency is not based on empathy or humanization, but to gain girls' or women's attention and availability. When that does not happen, for example, if the next girl also said no, boys and men feel unjustly deprived of a reward to which they felt entitled by following the script. Funders should support organizations embedded in feminist and gender justice frameworks to collaborate on programming that can avoid inadvertently supporting boys and men's entitlement and other such unintentional errors. Comment: I hope I have not done that Incidentally, through any of my earlier comments on this, I've tried not to do that. All right. Countering violent extremism organizations often lack a deep gender justice practice, so encouraging and supporting collaborations bringing together these areas of expertise can lead to stronger program designs. CVE itself has been a field dominated by men, and funding should support women's voices, experiences, and expertise as an integral part of shaping programs directed at dealing with the misogyny that impact them. 4. Intervene early and through routine systems to prevent movement along a spectrum of dehumanization and misogyny toward violent extremes. Misogynist incel ideology and other extreme male supremacist ideologies exist on a continuum, developing from mainstream structures of male supremacy, entitlement, and objectification of women. Given that boys often begin participating in misogynist forums in their teens, effective prevention necessitates intervention starting in childhood that address the roots of misogyny. Tompkinson et al. In 2020 emphasized routine systems of intervention and suggest that, quote, further education of community workers, police, politicians, and teachers to engage with misogyny's threat to public security would simultaneously solve some of the pitfalls of contemporary responses to gender-based violence more broadly, unquote. Education initiatives starting in childhood that focus on consent, healthy boundaries, and mutual respect are a significant starting point. Comprehensive sexual education offers a valuable means for delivering such content, and in the United States has been targeted by Christian conservatives and replaced in many locales with abstinence-only education that teaches gender stereotypes and victim blaming. Other subjects also play a role in dehumanizing or humanizing women. The standard English literary canon taught in U.S. schools is dominated by works considered classics written by white men that center only boys and men as protagonists. Many of these classics perpetuate male entitlement and sympathize with male sexual frustration, ignore consent, and present women as props or fantasies for men with little contestation from instructors. Comment: there's something called the Bechdel test. This is whether a work of fiction involves a scene where two women discuss with each other something other than a man. You'd be surprised how many works do not pass this test. Or maybe it wouldn't be. Updating curricula, drawing on a feminist and anti-racist perspective to reflect a diversity of characters and authors, expressing the experiences of and humanizing women, along with other excluded populations, can work against sliding into misogynist beliefs. Much of the funding for CVE goes to de-radicalization programs or short-term interventions geared toward preventing at-risk individuals at the 11th hour from violence. Deplatforming is another popular method that can be effective, but is limited in its ability to prevent the spread of supremacist ideology and must be combined with offline strategies. We recommend that funders practice longer-term creative thinking and fund diverse social justice organizations working on issues such as comprehensive sexuality education and education justice to shape prevention of ideological violence through structural change. 5. Fund more research and collaborations into male supremacism broadly and protect researchers' ability to work in the face of threats and doxing. One of the most needed resources for combating misogynist violence is dedicated funding to conducting research in this area. More detailed policy proposals, educational curricula, program designs, and other initiatives would follow from greater access to funding. We also recommend that specific funding to support collaborations between organizations and researchers bringing different areas of expertise is necessary for a robust strategy to challenge these ideologies and mobilizations. Given that misogynist violence has only recently been recognized in the CVE and counterterrorism fields, organizations often lack experts who are well-versed in issues like violence against women, male supremacy, and misogyny. While most recent misogynist mass violence has been connected to incel ideology, in 2020, a men's rights lawyer who also frequented Men Going Their Own Way, MG Tao, this is again the male separatist, Men Going Their Own Way, forums, targeted a federal judge, a Latina woman, killing her adult son, and had a list of other women judges on his intended hit list. Additionally, the Fathers' Rights movement has a long history of global violence, including hoax bombings and kidnapping attempts. For funders, offering grants for researching and understanding male supremacism broadly, not just incels, is crucial to addressing gaps that could pose future threats. In addition, while most tech solutions to misogyny, racism, and other forms of hateful or dehumanizing speech have focused on deplatforming perpetrators, we suggest a greater emphasis on preserving the ability of researchers and organizers to share their work in public. Comment: Antifa is 5% street battles and 95% research on right-wing individuals and organizations. Remember that. Also, the individual we shared screenshots of earlier in this video has gone on record on Twitter saying things, typical right-wing things like Antifa is funded by George Soros and other stuff like that. Does that sound socialist to you? It sounds fascist to me. Remember, anti-Antifa, anti-fascist. Well, you got a double negative there. It's a fascist. Would-be socialists who are falling for these lines really need to be intercepted, intervened with, and, need explained, this is not it. And it really is not it. As I've said before, that's how you build a fascist movement, not a socialist one. In fact, I'm going to break from this document for 1 second, and I'm going to put another screenshot on the screen, which is directly relevant to this, from that same individual. This is a very recent screenshot. Quote, "Stop assuming he's one of you, American leftoids." I believe this is in reference to that Giga Chad. "He's a real communist, which means very likely conservative. What? And would be considered a fascist right-winger in America. He's not, quote, one of you American leftoids with pronouns in bio." Well, actually he does have pronouns in his bio there on the screen. But you see the attempt at trying to deny that very thing that I was just talking about. Fascists trying to pose as socialists and addressing the fact that people are calling them out for what they are. We know there's a history of fascism. You can analyze it. And it's not something we want in the movement. And here's a very aggressive attempt at continuing to push it anyway. What should you do when you see this? You push back on it. You push right back. Don't allow this. All right. Individuals doing research in this area, particularly women, require protections against harassment and doxing, revealing of personal information such as home address and phone number to facilitate threats and in-person harassment that often accompany this work. Threats to personal security and the safety of family act as a deterrent to work in this area, as the harassers intend. We recommend funders set up a pool where any researcher working on misogynist mobilizations and other subjects with a high risk of doxing can apply to receive a grant for digital security services, expanding the work that the Urgent Action Fund for Women's Rights already does to support the safety of researchers and activists. Funding should support trainings on digital security for researchers that look at supremacist and violent actors. Tech companies whose platforms facilitate harassment and doxing should contribute to this funding as part of their commitment to protecting free speech. Even with increased security protections, both the risks of work on male supremacism and the strain of the dehumanizing subject matter itself strain the ability of researchers to do this work. Comment, this is the burnout of, doing any kind of social justice work, whether it is Marxist in character or whatever. Many researchers, journalists, and activists lack access to therapy and mental health services to help them process the psychological impact of studying misogynist content and violence. Many therapists may not be well equipped themselves to support clients doing this kind of work. We recommend an investment in designing and creating services to support researchers working on these topics, and funding communities and conferences where researchers can support one another. And that is the end of this document. There are several pages of notes. If you want to check them out, I will put the link. And again, that's from the Berkeley Center for Right-Wing Studies. They do an interesting range of publications, which are of use to the broad left, generally speaking. Now, the only comment I'm going to conclude with here, I've already given most of my thoughts on this, and I look forward to hearing yours in the comment section below, is that we've done a number of texts on the channel about socialist feminism or Marxist feminism. This is a tricky world that I don't think has been entirely figured out. Despite that, I still identify as a Marxist feminist myself and push for socialist feminism. We both cannot adopt a liberal feminist view that these problems can be completely solved within capitalism. They cannot, because capitalism, as it goes through its crises, I mean, it has a history. There's the gender division of labor. That's a whole thing. Again, we have a whole playlist, Women in Socialism, that goes into a lot of these themes. So there is oppression of women throughout the history of capitalism. So first of all, you got to make a break from that and get away from that somehow. And you're just not going to entirely do that within capitalism. Anyway, so it's part of the history of capitalism, but also as capitalism, advanced capitalism now, goes through its periodic crises, which are part of the structure and fabric of the logic of capitalism, capitalists will seek to divert attention and blame for the social crises onto various scapegoats. We saw it in the beginning. Oh, it's all the fault of soy males, or, in the straight up male supremacist, it's all the fault of women. Whatever it is, this serves the capitalists. So as long as the capitalists are in power, their system is unstable. That's the way capitalism is. So you're always going to be at a threat of the racist scape. Well, look at Donald Trump. The system we're in the post-2008 deregulated neoliberal environment. Capitalism is a casino. It's going up and down. It's very unsteady. It's not delivering that American middle-class dream of home ownership and a yearly vacation and all that stuff. We instead have neoliberal austerity, which is increasingly just spiraling out of control. And, without that class peace, it's got to take the class war, which inevitably arises out of workers' grievances, and try to spin those grievances into something else. Race war, international conflicts, whatever. They will use whatever they think is most advantageous to them. The only way we're really going to get out of that kind of threat is through ending capitalism and instituting a democratic economy where workers are the ruling class and the economy is not run on a for-profit basis. It's run to meet human need, and the bourgeoisie is no longer in power wielding capital over us, capital we create for them. But on the other hand, we can't take the approach of, let's be class reductionist and fix everything after the revolution. No. I mean, first of all, not only are more marginalized non-white male groups not going to believe you that you're going to do that, and that's mostly where it's coming from, is white men, suggesting, all these other forms of oppression, race and sex and heterosexism, and say, we'll just fix it after the revolution. Let's just do, no. Nobody's going to buy into that. No one was going to trust you. Also, you're the least positioned to be revolutionary within U.S. society. So there's a lot of issues with that. No, we have to make all the reforms and we make all the progress that we can now, knowing that until you get the bourgeoisie out of power, they're always under threat of being rolled back. And you have to make that your aim. As Marxists, we reject, for example, the Chris Hedges approach of you're never going to get rid of capitalists, but you can keep them in a state of perpetual fear and therefore hold on to your social democratic reforms, concessions, and gains. Well, actually, we could seize state power, as has been done many times in human history, and just run society along a different basis. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. This is a lot of ground. This is a 2-hour video. What do you think? Leave a comment. We'll continue the discussion below. In the meantime, thank you for listening. This is a big topic. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen for their contributions, all of which are encouraging as well as materially helpful. I really appreciate it, and it makes videos like this possible. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. Otherwise, thanks for all of your contributions to socialism generally. Join an org if there's a good one in your area, or start your own project if there's something you've been thinking about, and we'll catch you in the next video.